Osage, Cherokee, Muskogee Creek, and Yuchi. I'm currently working on a book on Plains Indian Sign Language called Talking with Hands. And I'm here today to share some stories, but I wanted to give a brief intro lesson on hand talk. And hand talk was a simple, direct means of communication that there's never been documented when it began, all that, but back when our Native American Indian ancestors spoke the linguistics, their languages was many. So that posed as a barrier for communicating. So they had hand talk was a simple means that they all communicated with their hands, and it worked. And then throughout the years it diminished, disappeared, and now it's coming back. And Teresa here, she kind of brought this back, and I stepped in and been teaching several lessons. The first sign, let's say we're here today. This is a sign for a meeting. Now, if we was in a council, it would be, you would do that sign like in a circle. That's like people coming together. And there's different, just like there's different languages, there's also diversity even in the sign language. But if we keep working with it, like if I was to go up into South Dakota, Montana, my Oklahoma hand talk would be a little different. There would be similarities, but we could communicate with one another. And so with these hand signs, we try to keep it real simple, but yet if somebody else said, well, we say it this way, then I'm going to learn that one too. See, in that way, it keeps evolving and going. This would be another sign for circle. This. Now, to make something or to create something is this sign. This is the sign right here. You kind of bump the fist, one going down, one coming up. Okay. Then, if we was working something, the hands would shift. Most reminds me of wobbly cars. And that's a sign for work. Some of these stories and stuff are creation stories. So I'm trying to show some signs here that is going to be in these stories so you'll be familiar with. So sometimes you get to talking and then you might forget the sign, or you might sign and you're not saying anything, but my hands are just working like this. Funny thing about it, last week, my daughter brought a friend over and they were sitting in the car on our living room door. We got a big window in there. So I was in there practicing. This is what I do every day to keep it fresh and not to forget. And her friend says, "What's your dad doing?" She said, "He's in there talking to himself." I said, what they say? He's talking to himself. Well, he talks with his hands. Why? Can he talk? Yeah, he can talk, but this is the way Indians used to do a long time ago when they had different languages and they wanted to, yeah. I said, oh, okay, that's cool. So I'll tell him, come on in and eat. And she said, no, he's already eaten, so. But I got to show him, to give something is this, like today I'm giving you these words, stories. Talking is like this. When we're talking with two people, it would be like this. I give you these words. And a sign for talking with words, here's talk, here's words, here's hand. Sometimes you can sweep both hands, or you can just touch that hand like that. And to give It's like this. It almost looks like a knife hand karate chop. But in the sign language, there's emotion in it, and sometimes there's pantomime, and sometimes in the stories, we have to use a little bit of pantomime and animation to kind of bring those characters alive. Just like if I was to say, in that story, this animal laughed. Well, depending on how that animal's character was, he might have been a shy animal, which, you know, he might want to cover his mouth, and so you don't see that smile right behind. And then if it was a hearty laugh, then this is how they would bring the sign for laughter. For a sadness, for a sign for face is this. And if a person is pretty and beautiful, then he would sign good. For face, if they were sad, some would say a tear, or others would do both. And kind of make that string down like that. So there's emotion in the sign language. There's feeling. There can be attitude in it to convey the communication with the hands. And right before I get in the story, the distance of the hands sometimes explains what a sign is doing. Just like there's some similarities of signs, and some might be out far extended, or some might be close to the head, or some close to the body. Would be the same sign, but they mean something different. See? So there, right there, we have to teach that. And when I'm doing this book, they wanted to cut down on the photos that's going to be in it. So there's going to have to be a lot of saying, 6 inches from the body to the right, because they want to make it short, so it's just not all thousands and thousands of pictures. Now, afraid is like, your fingers are like a little hook, and you kind of refrain back. Afraid. To say ready, that I'm ready to start, it's almost like you're stretching it back. So you pull it back. It means ready.
What?
Okay. And at would be like if you were saying right here, like if this was a mat, you would point right here at the top, at. Whereas sometimes they'll use a palm and point right in the center of the hand. So center of the hand sometimes symbolizes the ground. You come from back here and you're gonna go right there. All right, now we're ready to get started. This, let me tell you the sign. Native Americans, American Indians had different signs for themselves. Their signs for themselves might differ than what another tribe or nation would call them. So the Osages, sign for them was this. That meant that they shaved their head. They had that like a mohawk haircut. Pawnees had this. The Crow Indians, they tied their hair in a bundle in the front, and they'd have it like this. The Lakota people wore chokers, so they would sign for that choker. See? So sometimes in the stories, when there's a certain tribe, then I will try to relate a sign so you'll know exactly what story this is. So this is an Osage story. Way back, the great Osages were looking for a life symbol. That's a sign for symbol for their people. Many of them had already taken symbols. symbols like bear, buffalo, eagle. And so this one clan group went out. They were searching. That means walking. They were looking for a life symbol. When the leader, Osage man, he was looking, suddenly he found a web, spider web. This is a sign for spider web. It was all over him. He became annoyed. He was throwing it down. Like, this is a sign for bad. So he removed that web from off of him. And suddenly there was a spider there. And so the man spoke. He said, "You little," this is a sign for black, "thing, what are you doing here on this path?" There was a path there. And that little spider, he didn't say anything. So that Osage man began to speak. And he asked that spider again why he was there blocking that path. Finally, that spider, he spoke to that man. He said, this is my home right here. This is a sign for what are you looking for? The leader said, I'm looking for a life symbol for my people. So the spider said, why not choose me for your life symbol? And the man covered his mouth. And he looked back to the people who were behind him. As that spider said, choose me for your life symbol. So he was kind of smiling and kind of laughing back, covering it with his hand. Finally, the spider said, everything that I need, everything that I want, comes to me, to my home. I don't have to go nowhere. I stay right here. So choose me for your life symbol. The man says, all of the symbols have been chosen. Symbols of dignity, courage, wisdom, life. All of the good ones. And there's no more. All that is left. And he signed for skunk. Grabbed his nose. And he said, turtle. He signed for hard shell. He said that's all that's left. So that spider said, choose me. Take me as a symbol. So that leader, he took that spider back. And it became a part of the Osage way, the culture. The first born, this is a sign for daughter, had a tattoo of a spider that was put on her hand. That sign to the people meant it was inspiring for them. It gave her a place of prominence. It was she had a high-ranking way of they looked at her, that firstborn daughter, and then she had responsibilities in the family unit. So later they opened it up. Back when the Osages had a lot of money, and they could purchase that that symbol and give it to the other daughters, and they would buy their way into that way. So it's pretty much faded away today. Only a story. So that's the spider legend. Oh. This next story pretty much is a creation story. The creation stories go back to the beginning. Some stories go back before man was created and made, when it was only animals. And you could sign for those animals, again, deer, bear, buffalo, ground squirrel. When you think of a squirrel and you're thinking of what they may look, if you're a child, you would think of little fluffy cheeks. You may think of that little tail that kind of, sometimes when you see a squirrel, they're kind of quick and fidgety. You would kind of add that into that story. Let's see, what else? Raccoon is in this story. You would say a mask. And then you would say on his tail, those rings. So that's in that, so you can identify that's the character. And then in this story is bear. Now bear was the leader. He presided over all of the animals at that time. So now I think we can go into this story. This is a sign for time. Okay? The future is up here. And the past goes back. So you would go back to here for the beginning. Now, time is also described in culture as a moon, right here. They observe the moons. Okay? And then the sun. This is a sign for sun. Okay, in this story here, you're gonna see what was going on at this time. It was said among my Muskogee Creek people that long ago, in the beginning of this land, this earth, that all of the animals were here. Many of the animals and stuff were displeased. They wasn't happy. Because there were some, it was divided. There was division there. Some preferred daytime. Whereas this side, they preferred it to be, this is a sign for night. Nighttime. And so at this time, the animals came together, and Noguzee Bear presided over. Now Noguzee was described as being a grumpy leader. And many of the animals were scared of him. They feared him. Why? Because he was big, he had sharp teeth, sharp claws. And anytime somebody would say something and he heard him, you would hear him go. That's when the other animals and stuff would hide behind a tree or behind a rock. They would look at him because he was so big and fearful. And so at this meeting, this council, when all the animals came from different parts, they traveled there for this council meeting. In the middle of that council meeting was a fire. And so Ground Squirrel, who's known as Jaloptu, he walked around that fire, thinking before he spoke why he was going to say this. And suddenly he just stopped. And he looked around, raised up his finger, and he said, I proposed. This is kind of almost like a way, meaning he had given this thought, and he was letting them all know that he had an idea that would please everybody, that everybody there would think it was fair. He said, I propose that day and night be equally divided. It was so quiet at that time, I think even the crickets and all of even the mosquitoes probably stopped. And all you could hear in the back was noisy. So again, you would see each animal hiding, not knowing at any time he's going to come out there and stop that meeting. And to ground squirrel, he walked more with confidence now. I mean, he was feeling good. It's a sign for good. He said, I propose that day and night be equally divided. He stopped and he pointed over here at Woodcool, who was Raccoon. He said, look at his tail. How equally divided it is. I propose that day and night be equally divided. And so all of the animals were happy. At the end of that meeting, ground squirrel had walked by that fire, and he was going out, and he had to pass by Noblesy, when suddenly Noblesy just dropped his claw down and leaving permanently these white marks down the back of ground squirrel. And this also explained how ground squirrel got those stripes on his back. So a lot of our stories and stuff are really coded and examples and explanations. There's one about possum, how he got his tail. There's one about beaver, how he got his tail. And usually in a setting, there would always be a time to reflect and what did you gather from that story? And a lot of times in our stories, I brought all these little props. It just depends on what tribe that these stories come from. Some would start off to get the attention, rattle that drum a little bit, and the boys and girls back in that time knew that it was storytelling time, whereas others would take a flute and that calming, soothing relaxation, and those kids were all surrounded, that they would just get calm and knew that it was storytelling time. That was another way. Among my Osage people, the storyteller would use an eagle fan. And when he would step up, and they were all gathered there looking at him, that he would stand, and they understood the body language, the way he held the fan, the way he positioned himself, and that you didn't have to say, now you be quiet now, he's getting ready to talk. No, they knew the sign and that needed to be done. So they really emphasized and with the to get that respect. So all of that is in a lot of the culture here. And then some of them, my Creek people and my Cherokee people sometimes would use a turtle shell rattle and they would shake that. And sometimes in a story, they might go into a song and had that. But my great grandmother would use a rattle like that, and she would shake it and tell stories. So there's just different ways to present our stories. And let me check the time here. See where. Is that it? Was we going 30 minutes or just however long? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Good thing I shut the door and locked it. All right. Now, there's another story. Again, it's how Beaver got his tail. And this one here goes way back at a time when civilization isn't what it is today, with all the buildings and all the things that we see. It was simple times. And the animals at that time, they liked to play. And then in the story, it was said that Beaver, at one time, had a beautiful bushy tail, like many of the other animals. Even Rabbit, at one time, had a beautiful bushy tail. But Rabbit was always like a trickster. He would like to play games with people when they didn't want to be playing games. And so one day he played a trick on Bear. Bear snatched his tail off, leaving him that little short, stubby tail. So that's the story there about Rabbit, his tail. Now, in this story here, it was saying that Hani, which was Beaver, that he liked to play with Otter. And Otter was real long. He liked to get in that water and swim by the fish. This is a sign for fish. So if you ever want to go fishing, I guess we could use this for casting and then fish. Merge two worlds. And it was said that they would like to play, and they would play from the time the sun came up until it went down in the evening in the west. They played all day. So one day they went up to a mountain, and they would slide down and hit that water. This is a sign for water. Hit that water. And this is a sign for river. So they slid down. And then they would go all the way back to the top and slide down again. Finally, Beaver started getting sore on his backside. So he decides he's going to sit on his tail, that fluffy little padded tail. So he was getting all comfy. He would go down there, and finally, after so many times, he wore the hair off of his tail till it was just flat like a paddle. And that's how Beaver got his tail. Now, here's another little short story here. This one's about possum. Now, there's a lot of characteristics about possum. And today we sometimes can be descriptive on them that a possum was known for what? Playing possum, acting like they're asleep. And so in a lot of Indian stories, they would show possum as smiling, and they would show him with his eyes. And this is right on the eyes, when you squint them up a little tight like that. He would do that, and he would lay down. And the minute you wasn't looking, well, he was gone. Well, in this story here, it was said that possum had a beautiful bushy tail. And he was so happy about his tail that he started singing songs about it. Okay, this is a song. This is a song for song. He would sing. And he would laugh. He was having fun. And so the other animals were watching him. Over here was Rabbit. He was watching. And like I told you earlier, he played a trick on Bear. Bear snatched his tail off, leaving that. So he said it's not fair that possum has that beautiful bushy tail. I'm going to play a trick on him. Okay, when we want to conceal something, we cover it. It's like we was going to take something. Okay, so that would be that sign. That's take or So he said he was going to get Possum's tail. During this time of the year was a time for the big dance. A sign for dance, today we might go this with our fingers on top of our hand, or back in the old days, many of them would do this, which meant dance. So it was customary that Rabbit would go to each animal, compel them, invite them to the big dance that was coming. And so he went to Possum's home and he knocked on the door. You know how we do sometimes, somebody's on always continue watching TV. So Possum was no different. He sat there. He sat there and he heard. Finally he got up, and he opened the door and Rabbit says, I want to invite you. Come to that big dance. We would say Saturday, but back in the old days, when Indians would talk about Saturday, this was when they were placed on the reservations. Saturday was the day that they got their rations. So it was Saturday was the day that you went and you got your flour to make your bread and you would eat. So that was connected to that being Saturday. So we said, Saturday night, come, dance. I don't know. He just kind of gave that little brushing off. He says, if you come, you can have the best seat at the dance. Now, this got Possum's attention. Because Rabbit told him all of the animals would come by and see your beautiful bushy tail, and they would admire it. All of the animals, I'll be there. So, Rabbit told him, he says, I'm going to send Cricket over it, that little bitty black bug. He's known as the barber. He said, we'll send him over and let him groom your tail on your hair on your tail, and he's going to wrap a red cord on it. This is the color red. He's going to wrap that tail with that red cord. And so Rabbit had said that, and then he left. Time passed, and the sun was going down. In the distance, he could hear the laughter of the animals. And so he made his way. This is a sign for moon, but it was full. So he could see, and the moon was shining through the trees. And finally, he just reached back there and he grabs that cord and gives it a jerk, thinking that tail's going to be just all fluffy and groomed. And he made his way to that dance. Right at the front was Rabbit. Come dance for us, come dance for us. And so Possum got out there and boy, he started doing a fancy dance. Boy, he was really going. And just singing and spinning and jumping. Finally, he could see the reflection of his tail. He just kept going. Finally, over there on the ground was Bear. Oh, he was just laughing. Deer was just smiling. All of the animals would just seem to be discharged with laughter. And he said, they're just enjoying my beautiful bushy tail. And when he looked, he noticed that his tail was gone. And he laid down on the ground, smiled and squinted his eyes. And that night, after that, that's how you describe Possum. His tail became smooth. Oh! Okay, does anyone have any questions on the sign language? At this point, you wanna learn a couple more signs?
Would you happen to know the sign for Choctaw?
Choctaw, I believe there's a sign for Choctaw that, because they do the sewing, the patches,
Okay.
it's kinda like that, all the way down. Ooh. Well, I'm glad I knew. More questions? Sign for babies, pretty much universal.
Yeah.
Small child, they would depict what height and stature. An elderly person, a sign for elder was just like walking with a cane back there, and they would carry a pole or walk.
Did a lot of the sign language go away, Mike, when they didn't trade as much? Is that kind of?
The sign for trade is this. What happened, at one time, it was back during the times when they had, the residential schools and the government boarding schools, where they were forced not to speak the language, which it also included the sign language, and just to learn English. And at that time, it just really changed culture for
Yeah.
Native people. And this kind of just went on. Now, when I was a young boy back in the '60s, I would still see a lot of people signing. And I grew up, you know, it was common. At my house, my dad used English and he used sign language because of his dad and my great-grandpa. My great-grandpa was in a horse race, and his horse toppled over, landed on him, and it affected his ears for life, where he couldn't hear, he couldn't speak, and he was at the age of 12. And so he made sounds, and he was taught the sign language. Somebody helped him. And then he traveled when he was like 20 and went up to South Dakota, and he learned and lived with them for about 10 years, came back to Oklahoma, started his family, and then all of the kids all learned because their mother passed away at 38. And so this was their world of seeing sign language with their dad. And then he passed away, I'd say back in 1938, when my dad was about 5 or 6 years old. So Dad remembers a lot of that, plus my grandfather spoke sign language. He remembered, and I remember seeing my aunts and my uncles talking sign language and said, well, Dad used to do this, and then Dad pointed at me, he does that too. And my aunt said, you're gonna be like my dad. And never did even think, like I said, it was just common to see Dad saying, it's time to get up, and you know, this is a sign for coffee. Mm-hmm. And he said, coffee's ready, you know, get up. So I said, okay, I'll get up. And then sometimes he'd be sitting there, he said he was gonna pray. So it was just, it's so natural and common. So when I started doing this, you know, I just kind of like think back what I seen. And like I said, there was a lot of people use that sign language growing up, and then I'd say about the '70s, I started seeing a decline. Now, when I started going to school back in first grade here in Tulsa, I was shy, real shy, and I didn't want to talk. I didn't mind dancing and doing stuff, but the teacher says, Mike, you're going to have to interact. Can you want to get up and say anything? I'd say no. So I'd tell her, I said, come here. And she'd say, what is it? I said, I don't want to talk. She said, why? And I was standing there with my hands in my pocket like this. And she said, oh, just get your hands out of your pocket, just stand up and just tell them who you are. And it's like first day of school. I said, no, I can't do it. She said, how come? I said, I don't want them to make fun of me. They won't make fun of me. I said, well, I talk with my hands. She said, you talk with your hands? I said, yes. And I said, that's why I stuck my hands in my pocket, because I didn't want my hands to start relating. And she said, well, what would make you feel more comfortable? She said, what do you like to do? Your mom and dad says you like the Indian dance. I said, yeah. She said, will you dance for the class? I said, yeah. And then I stopped her again. She said, I don't have a singer. I can't sing. She said, you know a song that you can sing to yourself? I said, yeah. So I danced, and after that I got through, all the kids came up, circled me, and I had all kinds of friends, but yeah, I used the sign language when I was a little boy and didn't even know it. Okay, I want to thank you all for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope that you learned something from it. And thank you, Teresa.
Thank you for coming, Mike. We appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to ask you about your
Yes.
book. Do you plan on it being a series, or is it going to be one big book, and is it geared towards adult or children?
Okay, I always go back to this, that sign language is a simple, direct means of communicating, so it can be picked up by children, by anybody. Don't have to be Native American. I mean, American Indian, we try to use both words to describe who we are. But it needs, that it can be for anybody, because I've been being approached. In fact, next week I've got to go to a school in Oklahoma City that's for the deaf. And they want to learn the sign language and merge them together to where that they can be able to communicate, because of that. American Sign Language started from the Indian Sign Language way back in the eastern part. And like I said, there's Plains Indian Sign Language, there's sign that you can see in Arizona and that culture, and then back in the Woodlawn. And then it was just implemented and, evolved. So my grandpa, my dad's dad, he could talk with his hands, but in the hospital after he had injured his throat, they didn't know the Indian Sign Language. They didn't know what he was doing, so they gave him a card, and he learned American. So he was doing both, and he'd give me his card and trying to let me learn the letters, but I was still talking to him, using Indian Sign Language. So, but the book is going to be out in 2023. As soon as I get home, I'm going to be working back on it, because I got a deadline coming up quick. 7,500 word introduction about it, and it's got to be explained in simple terms. Nothing, no big words, and this has been the difficult part of it, of doing this, and then how many signs it's going to be in the book. The American Sign Language, they had 800 signs. The American Indian Sign Language is a little different, right now I haven't a clue how many I'm going to put in. I told them I wanted to start off with all the signs using one finger, and I think I've got about 45 that I can do just using one finger, and it'll be 2 fingers, and it'll be hand positioning, hand structure, and all of that. So, but yes, keep it simple. Thank you for that
Be
question.
interested to see it.